Mirabel Smooth pushed open the glass doors before her assistant could even reach them first. She didn't wait. She never waited. 12 executives turned at once, the way a room turns when it senses something is about to happen and doesn't yet know what. She didn't slow down. "You can finish the sentence you were saying about my company," she said, dropping her folder on the table with a crack loud enough to still every whisper in the room. "Or you can start over now that I'm in it." Silence. Then a voice she hadn't heard in 6 years answered her. "Start over." Mirabel's hand stopped, flat against the table, fingers spread like she was bracing against something only she could feel. She knew that voice before she even looked up. She'd spent 6 years making sure she'd never have to hear it again, and in one sentence, all of that careful architecture cracked down the middle. Sang-hoon sat at the head of the opposite delegation, jacket off, sleeves rolled, exactly the posture of a man who'd been in the room longer than everyone else and intended to stay longer still. He didn't smile. He didn't look away either. "Mirabel," he said, just her name, nothing else, as if 6 years hadn't happened and also as if they'd happened to no one but him. "Mr. Han," she said back, using his surname like a wall she was rebuilding in real time. Someone near the window shifted in their seat. Someone else reached for a water glass that didn't need refilling. The tension in the room had a texture now, thick, electric, and everyone in it could feel it, even if only 2 people actually understood why. If you've ever walked into a room and found the one person you built your entire life around avoiding, sitting right there like the universe forgot to warn you, drop a comment below and tell me. Would you have turned around and walked back out, or would you have done exactly what Mirabel did? Because Mirabel didn't blink. She sat down. She opened her folder. She did not look at him again. "Let's talk numbers," she said. For the next 40 minutes, she talked numbers. Acquisition percentages, timeline projections, risk clauses stacked on risk clauses. She was precise in the exact way people are precise when precision is the only thing keeping their hands from shaking, when every clean sentence is a small, private act of survival. Sang-hoon matched her, point for point, question for question, like the 6 years between them had sharpened rather than dulled whatever understanding used to pass between them without words. If anyone else in the room noticed, the 2 of them were negotiating like former enemies instead of business partners meeting for the first time. They said nothing. Some tensions are too dangerous to name out loud in a boardroom. At one point, a junior analyst on Sang-hoon's side pushed back on a valuation figure, sliding a printed page across the table like a challenge. "Our internal model puts the logistics absorption differently," the analyst said, a little too confidently for a man who hadn't read his own quarterly filings closely enough. Mirabel answered, without even glancing at her notes. "That number assumes your logistics division absorbs the transition costs," she said, voice flat and final. "It won't. I've seen your 4th quarter filings. Try again." The analyst looked to Sang-hoon, half panicked, the way a man looks to his boss when he's just been publicly outmaneuvered by someone who clearly did more homework than he did. Sang-hoon looked at Mirabel. Something almost like admiration crossed his face before he caught it and put it away, folding it back into the careful, unreadable expression he'd worn since she walked in. "She's right," he told his team. "Revise it." When the meeting ended, chairs scraped back. Papers were gathered in that particular hurry people have when they sense they've just witnessed something they weren't supposed to. Mirabel was almost at the door when his voice stopped her again, quieter this time, aimed only at her. "You cut your hair." She turned, disbelief written plainly across her face. "That's what you want to say to me, after 6 years." "I have a lot to say to you." He hadn't moved from his seat, hands folded in front of him like a man deliberately keeping himself in place. "I'm starting with the hair." "Don't." "Mirabel." "We have a deal to close," she said, the words coming out sharper than she meant them to. "That's the only conversation we're having." She left before he could answer. 6 years, rebuilt brick by brick. Her car was already waiting outside. She got in, closed the door, and sat perfectly still for 11 seconds before she let her shoulders drop. 11 seconds of a woman who has spent 6 years perfecting the art of not falling apart in front of anyone, including herself. Her phone buzzed. A text from Denise, her chief of staff and the only person who'd been with her since the beginning, since before the company even had a name, since Mirabel had nothing to her name but a suitcase and a decision she'd never fully explained to anyone. "How'd it go?" Mirabel typed back, "Fine." Then, after a long pause, her thumb hovering over the screen like it already knew what was coming, "He's the counterparty." 3 dots appeared immediately. "Which he?" Mirabel didn't answer that one. Some questions don't need an answer. The silence is the answer. Her phone buzzed again, less than a minute later. "I'm coming to your hotel. Don't argue." Denise arrived within the hour, still in her work clothes. A bottle of wine she hadn't opened tucked under one arm like a prop she wasn't sure she'd need tonight. "You could have told me his company was the one we were courting," Denise said, setting the bottle down on the counter without pouring anything, her eyes already scanning Mirabel's face for the cracks she knew would be there. "I didn't know until I read the delegation list in the elevator. And you walked in anyway. I wasn't going to let Sang-hoon Han make me miss the biggest acquisition of the year." Mirabel crossed her arms, chin lifted, every inch the woman who built an empire out of refusing to flinch. "I built smooth capital so nothing could take a deal away from me, not even him." "Especially not him," Denise said quietly. "That's the part I'm worried about." Mirabel didn't answer that. "How did it feel?" Denise asked, gentler now, "seeing him?" "Like walking into a room I used to live in and finding all the furniture rearranged." "Still standing, though." "Still standing," Mirabel agreed. "That's the only part that matters." She'd built smooth capital out of a studio apartment and a stubbornness nobody had asked her to have. 11 years. 4 continents. A reputation for closing deals other investors walked away from because she didn't flinch at risk the way people expected a woman who'd once had nothing to flinch at nothing. She flinched at exactly one thing. She'd been looking at it across a boardroom table 3 hours ago. The airport lounge, 8 years ago. She hadn't planned to meet him at all. That was the part that still undid her, if she let herself think about it too long, that the biggest turning point of her life had been an accident of bad weather and a canceled flight. 8 years ago, before any of it, she'd been a junior analyst sent to Seoul for a due diligence trip nobody senior wanted to take, 3 days before Christmas, carrying a suitcase that didn't match the weather. Her connecting flight had been delayed, then canceled, and she'd ended up stranded in an airport lounge at midnight, arguing with an airline representative who kept repeating the same unhelpful sentence in 2 languages, her patience thinning with every polite, useless repetition. "You won't get anywhere yelling at her," a voice behind her had said. "I've tried. She has a script and she's not deviating from it." She'd turned, ready to snap at whoever thought her frustration was funny, and found a man in a wrinkled suit holding 2 cups of coffee, offering her one like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "I wasn't yelling," she'd said. "I was being extremely clear." "That's what I said the last time, too." He'd held the coffee out further, patient, almost amused. "It's not going to fix the flight, but it'll make the yelling more bearable." She hadn't meant to laugh. It had happened anyway, a short, surprised sound that embarrassed her the moment it left her mouth. They'd talked for 4 hours in that lounge before either of them thought to exchange names, and by the time she learned exactly who he was, the name on half the buildings she could see from the window, she'd already decided she liked him too much to let it matter. "You didn't tell me," she'd said, equal parts accusing and amused. Would it have changed the conversation? Probably. "That's exactly why I didn't tell you." She'd believed, that night, that a man willing to hide his own name just to have an honest conversation was a rare thing worth paying attention to. She hadn't been wrong about that part. She'd just been wrong about how long he'd be willing to keep choosing honesty once it started costing him something real. The 2 years that followed were the kind she still, if she was honest with herself, measured every relationship after against, Not because they were easy, but because for a long time they were exactly what she wanted. He flew to see her more often than his schedule should have allowed. She learned to navigate Seoul's backstreets well enough that reporters stopped catching them in the obvious places. They built a private world small enough that neither of them noticed, for a while, how much pressure was building on the other side of it. She noticed first. She always noticed first. "Your mother doesn't look at me," she told him once, early on, more curious than concerned. "Not unkindly, just through me, like I'm a chair she hasn't decided whether to keep. She'll come around." "You keep saying that." "Because I believe it." She'd wanted to believe it too. That was the part that made the ending, when it came, cut as deep as it did. Not that she hadn't seen the warning signs, but that she'd chosen, again and again, to trust his optimism over her own instincts. She promised herself, packing her bags the night she finally left, that she would never make that particular mistake again, trusting someone else's hope more than her own judgment. She'd kept that promise for 6 years. Sitting across from him in a boardroom that afternoon was the first time she'd felt it genuinely tested. That night, in the quiet of her hotel suite, she caught herself standing in front of the window, holding a room service menu she hadn't ordered from, staring at nothing. She put it down. She picked up her phone instead, scrolled to a folder she hadn't opened in 4 years, and looked at nothing there either, just a blank thumbnail, a video she'd never deleted and never watched again. She locked the screen before her thumb could decide anything for her. The dinner that ended it. Sang-hoon didn't sleep that night. He sat in his office on the top floor of a building that bore his family's name, the city glittering underneath him in a way that used to mean something, and now mostly meant he was awake at 2 in the morning again, alone with a version of himself he no longer respected. His mother's voice was still in his head, an old recording that played whenever he was tired enough to stop fighting it. She was never going to fit here, you knew that. He hadn't argued with her 6 years ago. That was the problem. He'd sat there and let his silence answer for him, and Mirabel had watched him do it, and something in her face had closed like a door being locked from the inside. He remembered the exact moment she stopped waiting for him to speak. They'd been at a family dinner, the kind with place cards and a seating chart designed to remind guests exactly where they stood in the family's estimation. Mirabel had been seated at the far end, near a cousin nobody important spoke to. She hadn't complained. She'd simply noticed, the way she noticed everything, filing it away without a word. His mother had made a comment about certain families understanding certain expectations, loudly enough for the whole table to hear, looking directly at Mirabel while she said it. The room had gone quiet in that specific, cowardly way rooms go quiet when everyone hears something cruel, and no one wants to be the one who names it. Sang-hoon remembered picking up his water glass instead of his voice. He remembered Mirabel's expression not changing at all, the exact stillness of someone deciding something and not telling anyone yet. Later that night, in the car, she'd finally spoken. "You didn't hear what she said." "I heard it. You didn't answer it." "I didn't want to make a scene at my grandmother's memorial dinner, Mirabel. There were 40 people in that room." "I wasn't asking you to make a scene," she'd said, staring straight ahead, her voice completely level in a way that should have worried him more than shouting would have. "I was asking you to say one sentence. That's not true." 4 words. You had 4 words, Sang-hoon, and 30 seconds of silence, and you chose the silence. "I'll talk to her tomorrow, privately. That's how these things are handled here." "That's how you're comfortable handling it," she'd corrected. "That's not the same as how it should be handled." He hadn't understood, in that moment, how close he was standing to the edge of something. He'd thought they were having an argument. She'd already realized they were having an ending. The conversation with his mother the next day had gone exactly as he'd promised, quiet, private, careful. His mother had nodded along, said the correct things, and changed nothing. He'd told himself it was progress anyway, because admitting it wasn't would have meant admitting how much smaller his courage was than his affection. Mirabel had watched him report back the outcome with an expression he mistook, at the time, for patience. It hadn't been patience. It had been the last measurement she needed to take. She'd left 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday, while he was in Singapore closing a deal he could have postponed and didn't. No dramatic scene. No ultimatum delivered and refused. Just a note, brief and without cruelty, on the kitchen counter of the apartment they'd shared for 8 months, and a suitcase that had already been packed longer than he realized. "I don't think you're a bad man, Sang-hoon. I think you're a man who has never had to choose me over anything that actually cost him something. I can't keep waiting to find out if that changes. I hope it does, for whoever you love next. I won't be here to see it." He'd read it 4 times before the words stopped rearranging themselves into something less final. He hadn't understood at the time that her stillness at that dinner hadn't been calm. It had been the sound of a door closing quietly enough that only she could hear the latch. The next morning, a knock interrupted him before he'd finished his coffee. His assistant, June, stepped in without waiting to be told to. "The board wants a statement about the Smooth Capital deal. Reporters are already asking why she's involved personally instead of sending a delegate." "Because it's her deal," Sang-hoon said. "She built her company for exactly this. She doesn't send delegates." "Some people are asking a different question." Sang-hoon looked up. "They remember," June said carefully, "that you two knew each other before." Sang-hoon set his coffee down. "Handle the reporters. And if they don't stop asking, then I'll answer them myself." June hesitated at the door. "Sir, your mother called, twice." Sang-hoon didn't respond to that at all. June had worked closely enough with him over the years to know when a closed door meant leave, and when it meant stay, but don't push yet. He chose to stay, moving instead to straighten a stack of files on the side table that didn't need straightening, giving Sang-hoon the room to speak first if he wanted to. "For what it's worth," June finally said, "I don't think you should let this deal go quiet the way you let her go quiet." "I don't intend to." "Then say something today, not to the board, to her." Sang-hoon didn't answer, but he didn't tell June to leave either. 4 minutes early, every time. The deal required 6 weeks of joint due diligence. 6 weeks of shared conference rooms, shared spreadsheets, shared silences that stretched a little longer every time they were forced to sit across from each other. By the second week, Mirabel had learned to arrive 4 minutes before every meeting and leave the second it ended. A small, exhausting choreography designed entirely around not being alone with him. It worked, until the day a scheduling conflict left them alone in a conference room 20 minutes before anyone else arrived. Sang-hoon was already there when she walked in, reviewing a stack of documents. He looked up, and for a moment neither of them said anything. "You're early," she said, setting her bag down at the far end of the table, deliberately far. "So are you. I like to review the room before people fill it. Old habit. Very old." She pulled out a chair, didn't sit. "You used to be the one who ran late to everything. Meetings, dinners, your own birthday party once." "I remember that birthday party." "I wasn't asking you to remember it." "You brought it up." "I brought up the habit," Mirabel said, "not the memory attached to it." Sang-hoon set his papers down. "Can I ask you something? Not about the deal." "No." "Mirabel." "I said no, Sang-hoon, and I meant it as a full sentence, not an opening negotiation." He held up both hands. The closest thing to surrender she'd seen from him since the meeting began. "Understood." They worked in silence for several minutes, the only sound the shuffle of paper and the occasional click of a pen. Then, without looking up from his documents, Sang-hoon spoke again. "For what it's worth, I looked you up. Every year. I told myself it was due diligence, in case our paths ever crossed professionally. It wasn't. I just wanted to know you were doing well." Mirabel's pen stopped moving. "I didn't ask you to tell me that." "I know, I'm telling you anyway. You don't have to respond to it. I just didn't want 6 weeks to go by with you thinking I moved on and forgot you existed. I didn't. Not for a single year." She didn't respond. She picked her pen back up and kept working, but her hand wasn't quite as steady as it had been 30 seconds earlier, and they both noticed it, and neither of them said anything about that either. The rest of the room filled in a few minutes later, and the meeting proceeded exactly as scheduled. Numbers and clauses and nothing personal at all, at least not on the surface. But something had shifted in the room's temperature, subtle enough that only the two of them could feel it, and it didn't fully settle again for the rest of the day. If you've ever had someone say one honest sentence to you after years of silence and felt your whole carefully built composure wobble for just a second, you already know exactly what Mirabel felt in that room. Tell me in the comments. Have you ever had to keep working, keep functioning, right after someone cracked you open like that? The elevator. It was 2 days after that, when the elevator doors closed with just the two of them inside it. Sang-hoon reached for the button panel, then didn't press anything. You could just say what you want to say, Mirabel said, staring straight ahead at the doors. Instead of doing this. I don't think you want to hear it. I don't. Then why did you just ask me to say it? She turned her head slightly, not enough to fully look at him, enough to make the point. Because I'm tired of watching you almost say it every day for 2 weeks, she said. Pick one, say it or stop. The elevator reached her floor. The doors opened. Sang-hoon spoke before she could step out. I should have stood up for you. That day, in front of my mother. I should have said something and I didn't, and I've had 6 years to figure out why, and none of the reasons are good enough. Mirabel stood in the open doorway, one foot in the hall, one still inside. I know, she said. The doors started to close. She put her hand out, stopped them. Knowing it now doesn't undo 6 years, Sang-hoon. It was the first time she'd used his first name since she walked back into his life. He noticed. Word of the elevator moment didn't spread. There'd been no witnesses, but the tension between them started showing up in smaller ways that the whole floor could feel. Meetings ran longer. Neither of them backed down on a single clause. A negotiation over warehouse liability turned into a 40-minute standoff neither side needed, both of them digging in on principle instead of numbers. Afterward, one of Mirabel's junior associates, Priya, caught up with Denise in the hallway. Is it always like this with them? Priya asked. It felt personal in there. It is personal, Denise said, just not the kind you're thinking. Should I be worried about the deal? Denise considered that. I think the deal is the one thing that's actually safe. It's everything around it you should watch. Denise found Mirabel in the office late that night, going through slides she wasn't actually reading. You've read that page 4 times, Denise said, dropping into the chair across from her. Same page. I'm being thorough. You're being haunted. Denise crossed her arms. Talk to me. Mirabel closed the laptop. He apologized today. For which part? For not defending me, to his mother. Denise studied her, and nothing. It doesn't change what it cost me. Nobody said it should erase it, Denise said. But you've spent 6 years building a life where nobody gets close enough to disappoint you like that again. I watched you do it. I helped you do it. She leaned forward. I'm not telling you to forgive him. I'm asking if you're protecting yourself right now or punishing yourself, because those aren't the same thing, and I think you know that. Mirabel didn't answer. You built this company out of what he cost you, Denise went on, quieter now. I've always admired that about you. I've also always wondered what it would take for you to build something out of anything else. Mirabel let the silence sit there instead of filling it. Denise stood, squeezed her shoulder once, and left her alone with the question. The restructuring. Sang-hoon's mother arrived at his office unannounced 2 days later, the way she always had, the way that used to mean he had no choice but to listen. You're letting the board leak your personal history into a business deal, she said, not bothering to sit. Do you understand what that costs us? I understand what it already cost me once, Sang-hoon said. I'm not making the same mistake twice. This isn't about mistakes. This is about the family's position, our shareholders, our name. Our name, Sang-hoon repeated. That's what you led with 6 years ago, too. His mother's jaw tightened. You're bringing that up now. I've been thinking about it every day since. He stood, walked to the window. You told her she'd never fit here. I sat there and said nothing. And I told myself for years that silence wasn't the same as agreement. It was. Sang-hoon. I've already started the restructuring, he said, not turning around. The board vote is in 3 weeks. His mother went very still. What restructuring? The one that removes family veto power over personal matters involving executive leadership. I've been building the votes for months. You do that over her. He finally turned to face her. I do it because I should have done it 6 years ago, before she was even a factor. I let this family's opinion decide something that was mine to decide. That's not going to happen again, whether Mirabel forgives me or not. You think this makes you strong, his mother said. Standing up to me now when it's convenient, when there's a woman in the room to watch you do it. I think it makes me honest, Sang-hoon said. For once. His mother left without another word. It was the first time in his life she hadn't had one. The statement. Mirabel heard about the board restructuring from a source who had nothing to do with Sang-hoon at all. A financial journalist who called Denise for comment, assuming Smooth Capital already knew. Denise walked into Mirabel's office, holding her phone like it was something that might go off. He's been quietly stripping his family's control over the company, Denise said. For months, before this deal ever started. Mirabel looked up slowly. Before we even reconnected. Before, this wasn't a performance for you. Mirabel sat with that for a long moment. I thought his hesitation in that elevator was him deciding whether he wanted to fight for this, she said quietly. It wasn't hesitation. He'd already been fighting for months. He just didn't know how to tell me without it sounding like he was asking for credit. Does that change anything? Mirabel didn't answer right away. It changes what I thought I knew, she said finally. I don't know yet if it changes anything else. She called an old friend that night, someone outside the company, outside the deal, outside all of it. A woman named Farah she'd known since before Smooth Capital existed, back when Mirabel was still a person nobody photographed. You're overthinking this, Farah said, after Mirabel had talked in circles for 10 minutes without landing anywhere. You always overthink the things that actually matter and rush the things that don't. I'm not rushing anything. That's the point. I'm not doing anything. That's still a decision, Mirabel. Standing still is a decision too. I like standing still. Standing still is what got me here. Standing still is what protected you, Farah said gently. I didn't say it got you anywhere. There's a difference. Mirabel didn't have an answer for that one either. She was starting to notice how often that was happening lately. Can I tell you what I remember about the two of you? Farah asked. Back then, before any of it fell apart. Do I have a choice? You never did with me. Farah's voice softened. I remember you laughing more in those 2 years than I'd heard you laugh in the 5 years before them, or the 6 after. I'm not saying that to guilt you into anything. I'm saying it because I think you've spent so long being proud of what you built after him that you've forgotten there was something worth grieving in the first place. You don't let yourself grieve things, Mirabel. You just convert them into fuel. That fuel built a company worth more than his family's entire portfolio. I know, I'm proud of you for it. I'm also allowed to notice that it isn't the same thing as healing. Farah paused. You don't have to choose him again. Nobody's saying you owe him that. But you might owe yourself an honest answer about whether you're avoiding him because he's actually still dangerous to you, or because grieving what he cost you 6 years ago means admitting you lost something worth grieving. Those aren't the same fear, even though they feel identical from the inside. Mirabel sat with that longer than she wanted to admit out loud. When did you get so annoyingly perceptive? Around the same time you started calling me at 11 at night to talk in circles about a man you claim doesn't matter anymore, Farah said. Get some sleep. And Mirabel, whatever you decide, decide it because it's true, not because it's safe. You've had 6 years of safe. See how honest feels for a change. The gala. The gala came at the worst possible time, the way galas always seem to. It was meant to celebrate the deal's near completion. Cameras, press, both companies' names on a banner that felt, to Mirabel, uncomfortably similar to a wedding backdrop. She wore black. She always wore black to these things. It photographed like control. Sang-hoon found her by the terrace doors, away from the noise. "You look like you're calculating an exit route," he said. "I always calculate an exit route." She glanced at him. "Old habit." "From me." "From rooms like this one." She looked back out at the skyline. "They used to decide things about me before I opened my mouth." He was quiet for a second. "Not anymore." "No," she agreed. "Not anymore." A photographer approached, angling for a shot of them together. The story practically wrote itself. Self-made billionaire and Korea's most watched heir. Standing close, cameras hungry for the narrative underneath the deal. Mirabel stepped back before the flash went off. Sang-hoon noticed that too. "You don't have to do that," he said. "Step back, not on my account." "I'm not doing it on your account," she said. "I'm doing it on mine. I don't perform for cameras, I never did." "I remember," he said, and something in his voice made it sound less like a memory and more like an apology he hadn't finished paying yet. Inside, a man Mirabel didn't recognize, mid-50s, expensive suit, the specific confidence of someone used to being listened to, cornered her near the bar. "Ms. Smooth, Director Choi, Board of Han Industries." He smiled without warmth. "I have to say, it's fascinating watching you two rebuild something so publicly. Very good for optics." "I'm not sure what you're referring to." "The restructuring vote. In 3 weeks." His smile didn't move. "Some of us are wondering whether Sang-hoon is doing this because it's right for the company, or because he's trying to win back a woman who already walked away from him once. It would be a shame if the board mistook a personal decision for a business one." Mirabel set her glass down. "If your board can't tell the difference between good governance and a man's personal life, that sounds like a problem with your board, Director Choi. Not with me." "Careful, Ms. Smooth. This is still our company you're acquiring into." "And this is still my reputation you're testing," she said. "I'd think carefully about which one you're more prepared to lose." She walked away before he could answer. Across the room, Sang-hoon watched the exchange from a distance, close enough to see her spine straighten, too far to hear the words. He crossed the floor toward her. "What did he say to you?" "Ask him yourself." She glanced past him, jaw tight. "He's trying to make your restructuring look like it's about me, so the board can dismiss it as emotional instead of structural." "It is about you," Sang-hoon said. "Some of it, I'm not going to pretend it isn't." "That's exactly what he wants you to say." "I don't care what he wants. I care what's true." Mirabel looked at him for a long moment. The first time all night she'd let herself really look. "You're going to lose votes over this," she said. "I might." Doing it publicly, tonight in front of him, that wasn't strategy. That was you not thinking. "No," Sang-hoon said. "It was me not hiding. Those aren't the same thing either." Nearby, Director Choi watched the two of them from across the room, already composing the version of this moment he'd repeat to the board on Monday. June caught Sang-hoon on his way out that night, in the quiet of the parking garage. "Choi's going to use tonight against you," June said. "You know that." "I know." "You gave him exactly what he wanted. A photo, a headline. Emotional CEO risks company stability for old flame." "Let him write it." "That's not like you." "Maybe I'm tired of being like me," Sang-hoon said. "The version of me that calculates every room before he walks into it. That version is the one who lost her." June studied him for a moment. "For what it's worth, I think the vote's going to be close. Closer than you're prepared for." "I know that too." "The poaching attempt. If you're invested in this story so far, hit that like button now. It genuinely helps this video reach more people who need a story like this one today. Now let's find out just how far Director Choi is willing to go to stop this deal from closing." Denise and June had met exactly twice before the vote. Once at the gala, briefly, and once in a hallway outside a due diligence meeting where they'd both been waiting on their respective bosses to finish an argument neither of them were allowed to witness. It was enough for a strange, cautious alliance to form between them, the kind that happens naturally between two people whose entire jobs are protecting someone else from their own worst instincts. June called her the night before the vote. "I need a favor," he said. Not for Sang-hoon, for the vote itself. I'm listening. Choi's been quietly courting 2 of the abstaining board members with promises about expanded territory rights if the restructuring fails. If Mirabel's willing to put something in writing, a signal that Smooth Capital's confidence in the deal isn't contingent on Sang-hoon personally, it might be enough to swing at least one of them back. Denise was quiet for a moment. You're asking me to get my boss to publicly vouch for your boss's leadership, the same boss who broke her heart 6 years ago. I'm asking you to help save a deal that's good for both companies, June said. Whatever else is true underneath it. That's a very careful way of asking a very personal favor. I learned from someone very careful, June said, and Denise, despite herself, laughed. She brought it to Mirabel the next morning, laying it out exactly as June had, without softening or spinning it. He wants me to vouch for the deal's stability, Mirabel said, considering it. Publicly, before the vote. He wants you to vouch for the deal, Denise clarified. Not for Sang-hoon. There's a difference, and I think you should notice that June was careful enough to make it. Mirabel turned the request over for a long moment. Draft something, she said finally. Purely business. No mention of Sang-hoon by name if we can avoid it. I'm not doing this because I owe him anything. I'm doing it because the deal is good, and I don't want a board full of nervous men killing it over gossip. That's your reasoning. That's my reasoning, Mirabel said. Then, after a pause, ask me again in 6 months if it's still the whole truth. Denise smiled slightly and went to draft the statement. Meanwhile, Choi wasn't finished. Priya came to Mirabel's office 2 days later, visibly rattled, closing the door behind her before she spoke. Director Choi's office called me directly, she said. Not through the deal channel. Directly, they offered me a position. Better title, better pay, starting whenever I want. Mirabel set down her pen. What did you tell them? I told them I'd think about it. I wanted to talk to you first. Why would Choi want a junior associate from my team, badly enough to poach her mid-deal? Priya hesitated. I think he wants someone inside Smooth Capital. Someone who could tell him things. He asked a lot of questions that weren't about the job. Mirabel's expression didn't change, but something behind it sharpened. What kind of questions? About you, about whether the deal terms were being influenced by, his word, personal considerations. He wanted to know if I'd noticed anything. Meetings running long, private conversations, that kind of thing. And have you? Priya met her eyes steadily. I've noticed you're the most disciplined negotiator I've ever worked under, and that hasn't changed once this whole thing started. That's what I'd tell him if I told him anything. Which I'm not going to. Mirabel studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. Good, don't take the offer. Don't ignore it either. String him along for 2 weeks, tell him you're considering it. I want to know exactly how much he's willing to offer before this is over. It'll tell us how worried he actually is. And if he offers more, then we'll know the restructuring vote scared him more than he's letting the board see, Mirabel said. That's useful information. Thank you for bringing it to me instead of taking it. Priya left, and Mirabel sat with the new information for a long moment before picking up her phone and calling Denise. Choi's trying to plant someone inside the company, she said, without preamble. He's more afraid of this deal than his votes suggest. Should we tell Sang-hoon? Mirabel considered it. Not yet. Let's see how far Choi's willing to go on his own first. If Sang-hoon's watching his own board that closely, he'll find out anyway. I want to see if he does. Sang-hoon found out 4 days later, through June, who'd heard it independently from a source inside Choi's own office. A detail that told him almost as much about the state of his board's loyalty as the poaching attempt itself did. He went to Mirabel's office that evening, without calling ahead. You knew, he said, and you didn't tell me. I was testing something. Testing what? Whether you'd find out on your own, Mirabel said. You did. That tells me your intelligence inside your own company is better than I expected. It also tells me Choi is more worried about this deal than he's letting the board see. Both of those are useful. Sang-hoon exhaled, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. For a second, I thought you were going to tell me you didn't trust me enough to bring it to me directly. I didn't, Mirabel said honestly. Not because I don't trust you, because I don't yet know the difference between trusting you and needing you, and until I do, I'm going to keep making my own decisions the way I always have. Sang-hoon nodded slowly, like a man filing away a lesson he intended to actually remember this time. That's fair, he said. I'd rather earn the difference than assume it. 2 weeks later, Priya finally declined Choi's offer, in writing, CCing no one, keeping the exchange exactly as private as it had been when it started. She never mentioned it again, and neither did Mirabel, though the promotion Priya received at the following quarter's review was generous enough that nobody in the office needed the story explained to understand why. Choi didn't approach anyone else inside Smooth Capital after that. Whether it was caution or simple recognition that the attempt had failed, nobody could say for certain. But the leaks stopped, and the rest of due diligence proceeded without further interference from his side of the table. The vote. The vote came 3 weeks later, and it did not go cleanly. The board split. Director Choi's faction pushed hard, painting the restructuring as an emotional overreaction, a man led by a woman rather than by governance. 2 of Sang-hoon's longtime allies abstained rather than take a public side. This motion, Choi said, standing to address the room, asks this board to strip a governance safeguard that has protected this family's interests for 3 generations. And it asks us to do it during the exact quarter our CEO has resumed a personal relationship with an outside investor. I don't think that timing is coincidence. I think it's convenience. Sang-hoon didn't stand to answer him immediately. He let the accusations sit in the room for a moment before he did. You're right that the timing isn't coincidence, he finally said. It's not coincidence that I'm finally willing to do what I should have done years ago, the same year I was finally forced to look at what silence cost me the first time. If you want to call that convenient, call it that. I call it overdue. Midway through the session, one of the previously abstaining board members raised a printed copy of Smooth Capital's statement, reading a portion of it aloud to the room. A brief, unambiguous line confirming that the acquisition's terms and Smooth Capital's confidence in Han Industries' leadership structure were unaffected by, and entirely separate from, any personal history between the company's principals. Choi's expression flickered, just slightly, the first crack Mirabel had seen in him since the gala. That statement doesn't change the governance question, he said, recovering quickly. No, the board member agreed. But it changes the assumption you've been asking us to vote on. You told this room our outside partner's confidence was shaken. It isn't. I'd like the record to reflect that. The motion passed by a margin so thin, barely counted as a win. Sang-hoon stood in front of the board afterward, in a room gone quiet with the particular silence of people recalculating a man's usefulness to them. I know what this cost, he said. I know some of you will remember this vote longer than you'll remember the deal we're closing. I'm not going to apologize for it. He looked toward the back of the room where Mirabel stood, having come to observe the vote at his request, though she hadn't told him she'd say yes when he asked. 6 years ago, I let a room like this one decide something for me, he said. I'm done doing that. Aftershocks. By Monday, June's prediction had come true. A business outlet ran the headline exactly as he'd guessed it would, and for 2 days the story ate up more coverage than the deal itself. Smooth Capital's PR team fielded calls from 3 separate outlets asking Mirabel to comment on her reunion with Sang-hoon. She declined every one of them. You could clear it up, Denise offered, hovering in her doorway with a printed list of the coverage. One statement, control the narrative before it controls you. The narrative isn't mine to control, Mirabel said. It's his family's mess. I'm not going to clean it up for them by handing reporters a quote. Some investors are asking questions about whether the deal is still purely business. Let them ask. Mirabel didn't look up from her screen. The numbers haven't changed. The deal hasn't changed. If someone wants to pull out over a headline, they were never really in this for the numbers to begin with. Denise watched her for a moment. You sound very sure of yourself. I'm sure of the deal, Mirabel said. I'm still working on the rest. 2 weeks after the vote, an investor Mirabel had courted for months quietly pulled out of an unrelated fund she was raising, citing reputational exposure in a one-line email that didn't fool anyone about what it actually meant. She read the email twice, then set her phone face down on the desk. Denise, watching from the doorway, didn't need to ask what happened. She could read it on Mirabel's face. "Is this the part where you decide he's not worth what he's costing you?" Denise asked. "This is the part where I decide whether that's really what's happening," Mirabel said. "Or whether I'm looking for a reason to run before I have to find out if staying is worse." "Which is it?" "I don't know yet." Mirabel picked the phone back up, deleted the email without responding to it. "But I'm not going to let a coward with a fund I don't need make that decision for me." Sang-hoon showed up at her office that evening, having heard about the investor from June, who'd heard it from someone on Choi's side who couldn't resist gloating. "You didn't have to come here," Mirabel said, not looking up from her desk. "I wanted to. Denise let me in." "Denise likes you. That's not the same as it being a good idea." "I heard about the investor." "It's one fund. It's not a crisis." "It's a cost," Sang-hoon said. "One you're paying because of me. I'm not going to pretend that's nothing." Mirabel finally looked up. "I've paid costs before. I paid the biggest one 6 years ago, and I survived that too." "I know. So don't come in here looking guilty. Guilt doesn't help either of us. It just makes you easier to forgive before you've actually earned it." Sang-hoon absorbed that without flinching. "Then tell me what would actually help." Mirabel considered the question longer than she expected to. "Stop apologizing for the cost," she said finally. "Start showing me it was worth paying." He nodded slowly, and neither of them said anything for a moment, the office quiet except for the hum of the city outside the window. "Can I ask you something else?" he said finally. "Not about the investor." "You can ask. I make no promises about answering." "Do you regret it, building all of this, if you'd never had to?" Mirabel considered the question with more seriousness than he'd expected her to give it. "I used to think about that a lot the first couple years," she admitted. "Whether I'd trade the company for the version of my life where none of this ever happened to me. Where you'd stood up for me that night and none of the rest of it was necessary." She looked around the office, hers, entirely hers, built from nothing anyone had handed her. "I don't think that anymore. I think I'd have built something eventually, some version of this, but I don't think it would have been this fierce or this fast or this mine. You cost me something I can't get back. But you also handed me, without meaning to, exactly the kind of anger I needed to become someone I actually respect." "That's not really a comfort," Sang-hoon said quietly. "It wasn't meant to be one," Mirabel said. "You asked for the truth. I'm done handing you comfortable versions of it." The apology that almost counted. The following weeks were quieter, in the way that matters, not the silence that used to sit between them like a threat, but something closer to two people learning a new rhythm. They still argued. Denise still watched with careful eyes. Sang-hoon's mother stopped calling for a while, and when she finally did call again, it wasn't to argue. Mirabel answered it herself, against Denise's advice. "I owe you an apology," his mother said without preamble. "Not a good one. I don't think I know how to give a good one, but an apology." "Why now?" "Because my son gave up more for you than I've ever seen him give up for anything, including this family," she said. "I spent 30 years teaching him that our name mattered more than anything he might feel. He unlearned it in 6 weeks. I don't understand it, but I recognize it when I see it." Mirabel was quiet for a long moment. "That's not really an apology." "No," his mother admitted. "It's an acknowledgement, consider it a start." "I've built a life," Mirabel said slowly, "where I don't need anyone's acknowledgement to know what I'm worth." "I don't doubt that," his mother said. "I called anyway. Some debts aren't paid because they're needed. They're paid because they're owed." "Why does it matter to you now, truthfully, not the version you'd give a reporter?" His mother was quiet for a moment, long enough that Mirabel almost thought the call had dropped. "Because I watched my son become smaller every year after you left." she finally said. I told myself it was the pressure of the company. I told myself a great many things. It wasn't until this restructuring that I let myself see it plainly. He wasn't shrinking under the weight of running this family's business. He was shrinking under the weight of a decision he made once and couldn't undo. I did that. I stood in that dining room and I did that, and I told myself it was protecting our name. She paused again. I'm 71 years old, Miss Smooth. I don't have the years left to keep protecting a name at the cost of a son I actually love. I'm too old to keep confusing the two. Mirabel hadn't expected honesty of that size, not from this particular woman, not over the phone, not unprompted. That's the most human thing you've ever said to me, she admitted. I'm capable of more of them, his mother said. I simply haven't had much practice. If you decide there's a future here with him, not with me, I'm not foolish enough to ask for that much. I'd like the chance to practice on you as well, if you'll allow it. I'm not promising anything. I'm not asking for a promise. I'm asking for the possibility of one someday if it's earned. A pause. He learned that phrase from you, I think. Earned, not given. He said it to me twice now like it's scripture. It might as well be, Mirabel said, and for the first time in the conversation, there was something almost like warmth in her own voice too. It wasn't forgiveness, exactly, but it wasn't nothing either. Outside the boardroom. Afterward, in the hallway outside the boardroom, Mirabel found Sang-hoon alone, tie loosened, the adrenaline of the vote still visible in the way his hands wouldn't quite stay still. You almost lost, she said. I know. Over something you didn't have to do publicly. I know that too. She studied him. Why didn't you do it quietly? You could have. Nobody would have known it was about me at all. Because quiet is what I did 6 years ago, Sang-hoon said. Quiet is exactly what cost me you. I wasn't going to fix quiet with more quiet. Mirabel looked away first this time. I built my entire company so I'd never again be in a room where someone else's silence decided what I was worth, she said. Untouchable, self-sufficient. I made sure of it. I told myself that was strength. It was strength. It was also a wall, she said. I didn't just wall you out, Sang-hoon. I walled everyone out for 6 years. He didn't move toward her. He'd learned that much at least. I'm not asking you to take the wall down tonight, he said. I know what it cost you to build it. I'm asking you to know that I see it, and that I understand exactly why it's there. An ordinary Tuesday. The final piece came on an ordinary Tuesday. No gala, no boardroom, no cameras. The kind of day nobody remembers as important until it becomes the day everything actually changed. Sang-hoon showed up at Smooth Capital's offices without an appointment, which Denise allowed only because she'd been quietly rooting for this exact moment for weeks and wasn't about to be the reason it didn't happen. Mirabel looked up from her desk when he stepped in. You don't have a meeting with me today. I don't. He stayed by the door. I wanted to ask you something without a boardroom in the way. Ask. 6 years ago, you walked away because I didn't protect what we had when it mattered. I've spent the last year proving to my family, my board, myself, that I'm not that man anymore. I'm not asking you to forget what it cost you to find that out the hard way. He paused. I'm asking if there's room now for you to find out the rest of it, whatever that looks like, on whatever terms you need it to look like. Mirabel stood, came around the desk, stopped a few feet away from him. I'm not the woman you left standing in that room 6 years ago, she said. I know. I don't need you. My company doesn't need your company. I built something that doesn't require you to survive. I know that too, Sang-hoon said. I'm not here because you need me. I'm here because I want to be chosen by you, not required by you. Those are different things. I finally understand the difference. Mirabel looked at him for a long time. I'm not saying yes today, she said finally. I'm not asking for today. But I'm not saying no either. For the first time since the boardroom 6 weeks ago, something in her face wasn't guarded. That's more than I came here expecting, Sang-hoon said. Don't get used to it. She held up a hand before he could take it as more than it was. This isn't me handing you a timeline. It isn't me promising an ending. It's me telling you the door isn't locked anymore. That's a different thing than open. I can work with that. You'd better, Mirabel said. But there was no wall behind the words this time. Just a woman who'd spent 6 years making sure she'd never again have to find out the hard way whether someone would stand beside her when it counted, finally willing to consider that the answer might, this time, be yes. She didn't reach for him. She didn't walk away either. For now, that was the truth, standing exactly where it needed to stand, earned, not given, and entirely hers to decide. 6 months later. 6 months later, the Smooth Capital and Han Industries deal closed with a valuation 12% above the original projection, a detail that made every business outlet's headline and buried. For once, any mention of either of their names on a gossip page. Mirabel stood at the closing ceremony in the same black she always wore, and when a photographer angled for a shot of her alone with the signed documents, she let him take it. No one standing beside her. No one needed to be. Sang-hoon watched from across the room, close enough now that no one questioned why, far enough that neither of them needed to prove anything to the cameras. Afterward, on the terrace where a gala had once nearly ended everything, he found her again. You didn't step back this time, he said, nodding toward the photographer packing up his equipment. When he took the photo. I wasn't standing next to you, Mirabel pointed out. There was nothing to step back from. Fair, he almost smiled. Still, I noticed. I noticed you noticing. She turned to face him fully, something easier in her posture than there had been in months. Denise thinks I should stop keeping score. What do you think? I think I'm allowed to keep score for a while longer, Mirabel said. You're not behind anymore. That's not nothing. But I built a life that didn't need you to survive, and I'm not interested in a version of us where I let that discipline go soft just because you finally showed up. I wouldn't want you to, Sang-hoon said. I fell for the woman who didn't need my name to know her own worth. I'm not asking that woman to disappear now that I'm finally standing where I should have stood from the start. Mirabel studied him for a long moment, the city lights catching the same skyline that had watched both the worst and the best of what they'd survived together. Ask me again in a year, she said. Not for permission, for an update. I intend to. She almost smiled. Don't wait a year to check in, though. I didn't say you get to disappear for a year and call it patience. Understood, Sang-hoon said, and for the first time in 6 years, the silence between them didn't feel like something either of them needed to survive. It felt instead like the kind two people build on purpose. Chosen, not defaulted into, earned one honest sentence at a time. Somewhere behind them, the last of the cameras packed up and left. Neither of them noticed. For once, neither of them needed to. Below them, the city kept moving the way it always had. Indifferent to the 6 years it took two people to find their way back to a terrace, they'd both once thought they'd lost for good proof, if either of them still needed it, that some things worth keeping are worth the wait it takes to earn them properly. So, after everything Mirabel and Sang-hoon went through, would you have let him back in, or would you have kept the door locked for good? Let me know in the comments. Tell me which moment hit you the hardest. And if this story moved you even a little, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. See you in the next story.